Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us right here in our Marina Lounge for another enrichment lecture. Now, in fact, on the first day of the cruise, I was hosting the quiz, and this young gentleman came up and said, hey, I am a speaker, and I've been nominated for 5 Emmys and won 1 Emmy for TV shows, producing TV shows. Would you like me to do a presentation all about Hollywood gossip? And I thought that would be fabulous. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's one of your fellow guests. Can you please help me welcome to the stage right now, David Wiemers.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule today to come here and get a little Hollywood gossip and a few tales of Hollywood. As Peter said, I had a pretty great career in Hollywood. I was there for a little over 30 years. There were highs, there were lows. It was truly like a roller coaster ride filled with ups, downs, twists, turns, scares. But I can promise you all of it ended up being pretty exhilarating. It was a wonderful time, and I'm going to share some of my personal stories about Hollywood with you today. It was kind of fun. As I began my career early on, I was fortunate enough to sign with a literary agent. And she explained to me that if we did this correctly, over the course of my career, there would be 4 stages to my career. The first stage was going to be, who is David Wiemers? Can you see that? I'm ready for my spotlight, Mr. DeMille. Okay. Who is David Wiemers? This was the time when I was knocking on all the doors in Hollywood. I was trying to get myself known. But the truth is, I was just a young man who was trying to compete against guys like Neil Simon, Woody Allen. And how do you convince the studios who were so busy signing them up for projects that I was worthy of a look myself? These are the tough years, and this was the difficult stage of who is David Wiemers. The next stage, if you're lucky enough to enter into it, it is, we want David Wiemers. Oh, this is when the agents are finally starting to knock on your door. You're starting to get calls from the studios. These are truly the exhilarating times. I can remember that you've heard the expression, let's do lunch. You can see, I did it. I did so many lunches. That was, to me, was the great times, and it's the thing that I miss the most now that I am sort of out of the Hollywood scene. I miss doing lunches, hanging out with the guys. I'd have lunch mostly with writers and producers, stars occasionally, but it was the writers and producers, we were the ones who would hire the stars, so we'd share all of our gossip and everything. The third stage that you enter into is, we want a younger David Wiemers. Oh yeah, watch your back. The young ones are coming up behind you. Is ageism alive and well in Hollywood? I'm afraid it is. Hollywood really doesn't want you after the age of 40. As I was approaching 50, the writing was starting to become on the door there. This is a time when you start taking things off of your resume because it's aging you. I happen to think that I'm sharper, brighter than ever right now. I think experience should count for something, but it tends to play against you in the Hollywood arena. And the last stage we enter into is, who is David Wiemers? This is the stage that I am in now, and I humbly stand before you about to deliver my own eulogy. So let's start back at the beginning with, who is David Wiemers? Oh, look at that kid. Even now I can look back and think, geez, good-looking kid. If only I could talk to him and give him a little bit of advice. I think the first thing is, take good care of that hair, kid. It's hair today, gone tomorrow, isn't it? So I was a young kid, grew up in beautiful Estes Park, Colorado. Has anyone here been to Estes Park, Colorado? It's the beautiful, 2, 3 people, is that all? Come on. In the back, Roger, thank you very much. It's a beautiful place. It's right outside the Rocky Mountain National Park. My father was a park ranger in the national park. Beautiful, beautiful place to visit. But I graduated from high school. I was 18 years old. 15 minutes after I graduated, I had my bags packed and I was out of there. Couldn't wait to get out of there. Wanted to set my sight on Hollywood. I went to San Diego, and I went to San Diego State University, where I graduated. I graduated right after that. I was very fortunate in becoming a member of a theater troupe at the Broadway Dinner Theater. My role at the Broadway Dinner Theater is much like Roger and all the other singers and dancers who are on the stage that you see every night. I was doing the same kind of thing. I was out there singing and dancing and hoofing it and trying to do whatever I could. I found that I had a little more entrepreneurial spirit than that, though. So this was back in the, if I'm going to date myself now, this was back in the 70s. Jimmy Carter was our president. And if you remember back to the Carter years, those of you who can, those of you who can't, this is a nice history lesson for you. Back in the Carter years, we seemed to be running out of energy. There was not enough gas in the gas lines. Remember that? We were going through all of this. We had to turn off all of our lights. We were conserving water like crazy. So if I went to the mayor of San Diego, Pete Wilson was our mayor at this particular time. Pete went on to have a very good career himself. He became then the governor of the state of California and eventually a U.S. senator. Pete was our mayor at this time, and I went to him and I said, if conservation is the question, I know how to sell that message. I can put together a show for you that will entertainingly tell people how to conserve energy, water, electricity, gasoline. The mayor bought it. It was just great. I toured all over San Diego. We called ourselves the Conservation Corporation. For 1 year, I toured all over California. We did state fairs. We did outdoor pavilions. We did all of the local television programs throughout the state of California. I did hundreds and hundreds of radio programs. We had ourselves a grand year, and we sold the energy conservation message like crazy. I was in my early 20s still at this point. I wanted, though, to... San Diego isn't that far away from Hollywood, and Hollywood is what I had my sights set on. I wanted to become a writer for television. So I went back to San Diego State University to get my master's in writing for television. And that is where I turned in my very first script assignment, and the head of the department called me into her office. She said, "Kid," she called me in, "Kid, I read your script. What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I want to write for television." And she said, "Well, I've only had one other student who showed this kind of talent when he was writing the script, and he's now producing the Tony Randall Show. I want you to start writing for Tony Randall." So I did just that. And the student that she was talking about was this gentleman right here, Gary David Goldberg. The Tony Randall Show, if you'll remember back, this was after The Odd Couple, and this was a show that was being produced by MTM Studios, Mary Tyler Moore Studios. Gary was working on this particular show. After that, he went on and made the series Lou Grant, which was another spin-off of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, big, big hit. He then had big hits of his own. He created Family Ties, the show that gave us Michael J. Fox, and Spin City, again with Michael J. Fox. Great career. Well, I wrote what is called a spec script, a script on speculation. And this is one where you write an episode of the Tony Randall Show and turn it in, and it proves to the writers and producers on that series whether you can truly write or not. The material has to pop on the page. Later, as I was one of the producers who was getting spec scripts from people, I realized that what a spec script mostly did was prove that you couldn't write, and that happens more frequently than when it actually pops on the page. I've been talking to people who are in our audience, and they are reading for various theaters around the country, and they're telling me they're seeing the same kind of problems that are still going on out there. But I was very, very fortunate. They hired me the MTM Studios hired me to write an episode of The Tony Randall Show, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. I was on my way to Hollywood, California. I was 24 years old. Mayor Pete Wilson threw a big bon voyage farewell party for me. I'm telling you, you couldn't fit my head into the limousine to get me up there fast enough. I was halfway through writing my very first episode of The Tony Randall Show when CBS canceled the series. This was pretty much my life. What was I going to do? I was 24 years old. I had an apartment in Hollywood. I had rent to pay. I had bills to pay. This then began what I called the struggle years. It was 6 years before I really got my big break. I was knocking on doors like crazy. Remember, I'm still in the Who is David Wiemers stage, knocking on doors, trying to get someone to pay attention to me. I actually had a very fascinating 6 years, though. I was able to get jobs that were very unique and entertaining, and I actually have another lecture that I do called The Struggle Years, where I talk only about this particular period of my time, because the jobs that I ended up in Hollywood were some of the craziest you'll ever hear about. Maybe we can talk about that later. My big break came actually in 1984. This is Michael Eisner. He was the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Back in 1984, the Walt Disney Company was very much a struggling studio and an entertainment conglomerate. Walt had died back in the late 60s, and his son-in-law, Ron Miller, had taken over as CEO. But Disney was struggling. Its animation features were not what they used to be during the heyday of when Walt was there. They did not have a television department at all. Michael Eisner came over as CEO from Paramount, where he had been the head there at Paramount, and prior to that he had been president of ABC Network. So the board of directors at Disney had very high hopes that Michael Eisner was going to stir things up a bit, and as we know, he certainly did. So Michael came in, and he thought that it was kind of silly that the Walt Disney Company didn't have any television shows. At that time, the attitude was, well, we only do feature films. We don't do television. Hanna-Barbera does animated television programs. And he said, this is ridiculous. We should be in there too. So he sold 2 series, one to CBS and one to NBC. He had some people within Disney who he put on the NBC show, which was called The Gummy Bears. This other show on CBS, though, had nobody attached to it. So there was a call, and 200 writers and producers, such as myself, were called in to audition, really pitch themselves and their ideas for this particular show. Well, at this point, I was very fortunate to get called into this, but in a room full of 200 other people with a lot more credits than I had, I could pretty much count on this hand how many credits I had. I figured, what are the chances of getting any kind of assignment here? But as I listened carefully, I listened to what CBS was saying the program was all about, and then I listened to what Disney said the program was about. And I had a writing partner who I was working with at this time, Ken Kuntz. And I turned to Ken afterwards and I said, I don't think Disney knows what this show is. And I really don't think CBS knows what this show is. So why don't we just come up what we think this show could be, and we'll pitch that. And that's exactly what we did. And that pitch meeting was just a revelation, because very smugly CBS looked over at Disney and said, that's what we've been telling you the Wuzzles is. And Disney said, no, that's what we've been telling you the Wuzzles is. They gave us the second assignment. The pilot had already been done. Ken and I got the second script. They gave the third assignment to another writer. Ken and I finished our assignment, and both CBS and Disney were so happy with the script, they took the assignment away from the third writer and gave it to us. By the time we got to the 4th episode, Disney signed us on as the exclusive writers and producers of this TV show, which was called The Wuzzles. So if I go down in the history books at all, it's that I was the very first writer and producer hired by Disney for a television program, and I did Walt Disney Company's very first animated television series. This was the Wuzzles. These are animals that are, you can see Hoppo there is half elephant, half rabbit. It was kind of a crazy world that they lived in. We decided to get some of the talent for the voices on this. We sort of reassembled many of the old Laugh-In cast. Everyone remember Laugh-In from the 60s? Yeah, we all kind of grew up with that, didn't we? This was Joanne Worley. She was the voice of Hoppo for me. We also had Henry Gibson in there. He was the voice of Ellaroo. We had Ruth Buzzy in there. We had many others that we worked with. This is all the gang, the first TV show. That's me over on the right-hand side over there. Alan Oppenheimer's beside me. You can see Henry Gibson, Joanne Worley. The blonde there, that was my writing partner, Ken Coons. In the middle in the front row there, that was Stan Freberg. Remember, he was sort of a legend, and it was wonderful working with him. In the red sweater right in front was Bill Scott. I was thrilled to be working with Bill Scott. I sort of had grown up with many of his voices. He was sort of a legend in animation for his voices. He was the voice of Bullwinkle, Captain Crunch, George of the Jungle, Mr. Peabody. He was 65 years old, and he had a stroke and passed away just weeks after this particular picture was taken. So when I went back and found that I had this picture, I was thrilled to have it still. The following year, we finished up our first season of the Wuzzles, and I was under contract with Disney now, and they just put me in a room and said, give us another series. So Ken and I worked, and we created the series DuckTales. Well, DuckTales went through the roof. It became the most successful animated series in history. It held that title for many, many years. It made buckets of money for the Walt Disney Company. There's another show now called The Simpsons. It's kind of surpassed it now. But for a very long reign, we were the most successful animated series that there was. We had taken a lot of the comics from Carl Barks and expanded upon it and made this particular series. Alan Young, you might remember him from Mr. Ed. He was the voice, Wilbur, remember Wilbur? He was the voice of Scrooge McDuck. Great guy to work with. We lost Alan last summer. He was 96 years old, and he passed away, and I miss my old friend. June Foray, I also got to work with on this particular series. June, like Bill Scott, they were the team that did, if he was Bullwinkle, she was Rocky. And she's been the voice of just about everything that you've ever heard on any animated show or commercial over the years. June is still with us. June is 99 years young, I'm proud to say, and still hanging in there, going strong. June came in one day, and she had a cast on her wrist and everything. She was all bundled up. Oh, June, what happened? Well, she said she had carpal tunnel syndrome. The problem was she was having to turn over all of her residual checks and sign them, and she had so many to sign, she developed carpal tunnel syndrome. No one felt sorry for her, including me. God love her. It was just great working with the great June Foray, however. Well, with the success of DuckTales, my career was now into stage 2. We want David Wiemers. This was the most exciting time. The studios were now calling. They were making offers and asking us to do anything and everything. It was a wonderful time. There were times when it was a bit, you'd sort of leave scratching your head. I can remember once I was called to a meeting at Warner Brothers. Lisa Henson was the development executive in charge of this. Lisa is Jim Henson's daughter and still going strong in as a producer herself. She called Ken and I in. She had this thing that she wanted us to develop, but it was all hush-hush, very secret. I left the meeting and I told Ken, I said, you know, this is so hush-hush. There's only 2 people in Hollywood who work under this kind of secrecy. So it's either got to be Steven Spielberg or Woody Allen, one of the two. Turns out it was Stephen. The show that we ended up working on actually got split into two different categories. Half of what we developed became the Warner Brothers hit Tiny Toons, and the other half became a movie. It was called Space Jam with Michael Jordan, his one and only movie, I think. Anyone see that? No? All right, we'll have them play it over the television tonight. In 1988, I was fortunate enough to win the Emmy for Jim Henson's Muppet Babies. This was a great honor, and I am sad to say that I had a meeting with Jim Henson just 1 week prior to his death. It upset me very much when he passed away just from a case of the flu. Oops, I'm going to go back. In 1988, I was nominated. I got the Emmy for the Muppet Babies, and I was also nominated that year for the Humanitas Award. The Humanitas Award is awarded by the church, a Catholic church, a Presbyterian church. They go together, and they nominate 3 scripts that they feel most improved the human condition. So I was nominated this year for an episode of, it was called Galaxy High School. It was only on CBS for 1 year. It was about a high school that had intergalactic students from all over the universe. A great honor to be nominated for this, but who did I lose to? My friend Gary David Goldberg. He had written an episode of his Family Ties, and he won it for that. The other writer who was nominated is Alan Burnett. The 3 of us were friends. I'm still friends with Alan. He's been doing all of the Batman movies forever and ever. We lost Gary, unfortunately, to brain cancer about 2 years ago, so I hated to see my friend go there, but it was a good time. We had a lot of commiserating we did. Because I had been nominated and won the Emmy that year and had been nominated for the Humanitas, the doors started knocking. I started getting social invitations that I never expected before, including the Pope and the President. Pope John Paul II was coming to the United States, and lo and behold, I got an invitation in the mail to have an audience with the Pope himself. Wow. And lo and behold, President George H.W. Bush was coming to Los Angeles, and he requested that I join him for breakfast while he was there. Now, I'm telling you, I went to all my friends, and I said, this is pretty good for someone who is neither a Catholic or a Republican, right? It was such great fun. The Pope, now, you know, I'm thrilled that I was invited, but let's face it, he wasn't exactly a mesmerizing person. But the people that I got to meet who were also invited there, that made my entire day. I got to meet the great Bob Hope on that day. There were many others who were there. I found myself sitting next to Oliver Stone, the great director. Marlo Thomas and Phil Donahue were sitting beside me, got to meet them. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Oh yeah, and the Pope was there too. When I met with the president, like I said, it was at this hotel. He invited Tony Danza also. He invited another couple of writers who had a good year that year. And the Pope, the president sat down and he said, I just want gossip. That's all he wanted was gossip. So we had breakfast with the president and we gossiped. After the breakfast was over, the president got up, he straightened his tie, and he was just grinning from ear to ear, and he said, I can't wait to tell Barbara. So I have pictures of them just commiserating over everything that we discussed on that particular day. I was in stage 2 now, and I was having great success, and I was the number 1 guy when it came to children's programming. But I didn't really want to stay in children's programming. My heart had always been in situation comedies. I wanted to write for adults. So I had to go through the process of reinventing myself all over again, which means going up to that next higher level. So I was writing more scripts, and as it turns out, we had 2 of the hottest scripts in Hollywood. Over the years, I ended up I wrote for more than 50 television series. I have 157 half-hour scripts that have been produced. I can't even count how many scripts I wrote that have not been produced. But that's a pretty good run for Hollywood. I wrote a Murphy Brown. Do you remember Murphy Brown? I wrote a Murphy Brown and a Roseanne that were just considered hot scripts. So the studios now were bidding for our services, and we were writing situation comedies like crazy. I'm going to show you a few now. These are the series that I was on for years at a time, as we had good runs with them, and I would be on the production staff then. Coach, remember Coach with Craig T. Nelson, Universal Studios? That was mine. Ran for 7 years. I was on for 3 of those years. We had a lot of fun. I can tell you it was very satisfying going back to my class reunions. I was the guy who didn't make the football team, and to going back and telling all the jocks, guess who's producing Coach now? Felt pretty good. Another series that I was on for 2 years was Major Dad with, well, thank you, with Gerald McCraney. I can tell you a few nightmare stories about that series. Another series was Harry and the Hendersons. I had a very good reputation in Hollywood of when a movie was a big success, they would call Ken and myself to make a television series out of that particular movie. This had been a big movie with John Lithgow. We created a series out of it with Bruce Davison. And, of course, Harry in the center there. I can remember coming to work one day, and this was Kevin Peter Hall. He was the guy who was inside the suit for Harry and the Hendersons. And we showed up at work one Monday morning, and Kevin had died. We didn't know he was sick. He was gone. It just was like pulling the rug right out from under our feet. Not only were we going to have a tough time trying to reassign this, because Kevin was just a great guy, great actor who could get all the emotions out inside a big suit like that. But he was 7'3". It's hard to find another actor to fill those particular suits, I can tell you. Well, we were just having ourselves a miserable day that day. This is Rick Baker, who had created the suit for us for Harry and the Hendersons. I mean, he's up there with Meryl Streep. He's got so many Oscars and nominations. He's got 7 Oscars to his name. He's been nominated, I believe, 11 times. Every year, he's always up for Best Makeup. Well, he had created this, and he had special 3 guys who were just working all the facial muscles and machines off the set and everything. So we were commiserating, how are we ever going to replace our good friend? He finally said, come with me. So he had it's now legal in California, but it's the kind of tobacco that just became legal, if you know what I mean. So we walked up, and we walked up to the back lot, and we sat on the steps of the Norman Bates house from Psycho. Remember that? So we're sitting up there on the steps, and we're singing our blues and feeling bad about Kevin and what are we going to do, how are we going to fill this. And all of a sudden, all of the tour buses from the Universal Studios are coming up, and they're waving to us. And they think that Norman Bates' mother is going to be coming out and hacking us up any time now. It was just a wonderful, wonderful day. It's one of my favorite memories as I look back over the entire situation now. My day with Norman Bates. I was having lunch again with CBS about this time, and they were talking about their new series that were going to be coming out on their fall schedule. They were very excited about certain things, and they said, have you heard these 2 guys who are doing this particular show? Well, have you met them yet? And I said, no. They said, well, you know what? They're kind of like a young Dave and Ken. Just like that, I slipped into stage 3. I went home that night absolutely petrified. Oh my God, here they come. I'm now referred to as the old Dave and Ken. This is the time where Hollywood was starting to change. I was what was called a showrunner. I would be hired by the studios, and the studios could put me on any show that they wanted. Now, the studios themselves were being bought by conglomerates, by big companies, and television was starting to change too. Cable was coming in, so we had 3 networks. We ultimately had 4 when Fox came into it. Now cable came in and it's starting to spread things around. So we could see that things were changing. No longer were we under contract for year after year after year. Instead, it would be project by project by project. I can remember having lunch at one particular point with Pam Dauber. Remember Pam from Mork and Mindy? Sure. Well, she was so frustrated herself because she was about 40-ish at this point, and she said, nobody will hire me. Why can't I get hired? Robin Williams, who she had worked with, his career was absolutely soaring after Mork and Mindy. Pam could not get hired. Please, write a vehicle for me, do something. But the truth is we couldn't because the studios weren't buying it. One thing that did change during this particular time was that there hadn't been a brand new studio in Hollywood for decades, not for decades. And now this is when Jeffrey Katzenberg, Steven Spielberg, and David Geffen decided to come together to form DreamWorks. Well, I had worked very closely with Jeffrey Katzenberg at the Walt Disney Company for years, so that when he went over and started this, he pulled me along with him and wanted me to start up the television animation department over there as well. I gladly signed up, and that was when we made a very sweet deal with the ABC network, where we were going to provide all of their animated programs on Saturday morning, and we were going to be the exclusive one to do that for ABC. Very sweet deal. Well, Michael Eisner got word of that back at Disney, and that is when Disney bought ABC. If you think that that wasn't done for anything other than sheer revenge, I can stand here and tell you otherwise. It was not a sweet deal that, oh, this is good synergy, these 2 companies belong together. It was revenge, and DreamWorks was out, O-U-T. We had a very tough time trying to sell any animated program. We finally, it's the only time I sincerely believe this, that I saw Steven Spielberg get down and beg to get on a network, and that was at Fox. We had one show called Igor, and then they dissolved, DreamWorks dissolved their television department. Too tough of a go. They've done very, very well in their animated feature movies, as we all know, and they've given Disney a good run for their money there. But it's now the sort of the 2 companies who are the big guns in town. Things that were also changing, this is when all the production was running away, leaving Hollywood and going to Canada. We had the Arnold, who became the governor of California, and one of the reasons he was getting a big push to get in there was to try to retain some of the production and keep it in California, because it was going off to Canada. And do we have any Canadians in the room? A few, yes. Love the Canadians, but they were getting a little greedy because they wanted to not only have the benefits of things being filmed there, but they wanted to start producing it as well. So they wanted to have only Canadian writers on the show. There was just one problem. They didn't have the talent pool. And now the product's coming back to the inside the U.S., and the studios aren't liking it because the material just wasn't there. So this was a stage in my, we want a younger David Wiemers, and guess what? Now we want a Canadian David Wiemers. My agent was working like crazy to get me to be a Canadian citizen or have Canadian residency, dual residency going back and forth. It was absolute craziness. Another thing that I had over the course of my career is I didn't want to have any regrets. I'm one of those kind of people who I don't want to look back over my life and say, oh, I wish I had done this, I should have done that. I don't want to live that way. But I do have one. This was when I was at the Walt Disney Studios, and a call came in. My agent said, there's a producer who wants to work with you. He's got a project. He wants you to read this and do a show, make a show out of this. So I said, okay, I'll read it. It was a comic book. He had purchased the rights to it. And I read it, and I got back to my agent and said, tell Fred that it's got a cute title. It's kind of cute, but I said, there's nothing there. I'm not interested at all. Fine, no problem. 2 weeks later, my agent calls back, and she said, Fred's on the phone again. He really wants you to make this into a television show for him. I said, look, I read it. It's cute, but I don't think there's anything there. And I really evaluated this. I had the #1 show in television right then. I was sitting at Disney. I had a very nice contract. Why am I going to give that up, right, for something speculative like this? I said, no, I really am not interested. Thank you. Another 3 weeks passes. I get a phone call again. Okay, they want you to do this series, and they're willing to give you 10% of the merchandising rights. Now, this never happened in Hollywood. Hollywood had made this mistake one other time. It was to a kid named George Lucas and his little project called Star Wars, which made him a gazillionaire, I believe. The merchandising alone had made so much money, and the studios had lost out on so much because of the merchandising rights, they just did not give merchandising rights to anyone. So to receive this now and get an offer of 10% of the merchandising, okay, maybe it was sounding a little better. Ultimately, we talked it over, and we passed on it. The next year, this made the cover of Time magazine. And the cover of Time magazine was merchandising alone reaches $800 million. Regrets, I have a few. So, okay, it had a cute title, but I didn't go anywhere near it, I'm afraid. So, the writing was on the wall. I reached the age of 50, and I sort of said goodbye to Hollywood. I know I wanted to leave while I was still sort of on a high. So I said goodbye. But now I've had to reinvent myself, now that I'm back in my initial stage again of who is David Wiemers. I had worked with so many great artists at Disney that I decided, well, I'm going to take up painting. That was my New Year's resolution in 2010. I'm going to take up painting. And I discovered that I actually had a bit of talent for it. But before, I had worked with such great artists at Disney, and I would always call them into my office. And I'd say, okay, I've got this idea, and I want it to look like this, know a little more of that. And they would come back, and it would just be a great drawing, and it would actually be better than anything that I could have imagined myself. Now, all of a sudden, I didn't have these guys to call into my office. So I started studying and doing my own thing. This was one of my first paintings. Anyone like Dame Edna? Yes, love Dame Edna, one of my favorites. I thought, what if Dame Edna hired me to do her official portrait? One that she wants to be perfect for all of her possums. And then a hurricane blows through. So that's the name of this painting is Hurricane Dame Edna. Another painting, this is called Salad Days. I think many of us on the cruise ship can certainly relate to this. Doesn't it seem that the older we get, the more weight that we're gaining? We're eating salad, but we're kind of always thinking about that dessert, aren't we? There it is. I'm very proud to say that this won first place at the San Diego State Fair. Out of all 1,700 paintings, this came in #1. This was my tribute to Fred Astaire. This is called A Stairway to Heaven. This did well for me too. This is a fun one. This is called The Last Thing the Spider Ever Saw. My high school art teacher is a good friend of mine, and she's a large lady, and she has this big fear of spiders. And I said, no, wait a minute. You're a big lady. Imagine what that spider thinks of you. And it was from that point of view that I decided to surprise her with this particular painting called The Last Thing the Spider Ever Saw. I've had success with my art. I had a one-man art show in Laguna Beach. I have some people who are in the audience here who actually came to that particular art show. Thank you very much. It's been fun to display my art, and the goal that I kind of wanted to get out of this is I wanted my artwork to represent my humor. I thought I had 30 years in Hollywood where I presented myself with words, can I show my humor now without words? So that's what I'm trying to do with my art and having the time of my life. And when I'm not doing that, then I'm doing lectures like this. I'm cruising all over the world. I did 8 cruises this past year. I've got 8 more on the books for next year. I'm absolutely loving sharing my stories and traveling all around the world doing this. I was in Moscow in 2013, Greece a couple years ago. You never know where I'm going to drop in next. So we're going to wrap up here. Got to be out of here in a few minutes. I thought that I would share with you one more story, one more tale from Hollywood. This happened in 1993. I found that I was invited to Bob Hope's 90th birthday party. NBC was having a big bash for him. And I went to this formal dinner, and I found myself at a 6-top table, and I was sitting next to George Burns himself. God love him. George, at this point, was 98 years old, and I thought, this is just a great opportunity. So as the evening developed, I asked him a very serious question. I said, Mr. Burns, what do you think is the key to success and longevity? I really wanted to know. He's done it all. And Mr. Burns, God love him, he took it seriously. He was puffing his cigar. He thought about it for a minute. He looked at me and he said, keep breathing. So who are we to argue? I'd like to thank you all for coming here today and being with me. And I ask you, keep breathing, okay? Thank you. Do we have time for question and answers? Does anyone have a question? We've got 5 minutes if we can squeeze this in. Anybody? Where did we find another herring? We did, and it was tough. We lasted another year on the network. Good. Anybody else? If not, thank you very much. Have a pleasant rest of your voyage here.